The word remake is a tricky task to achieve in a game series. Fans of the originals are quick to point out differences and have high expectations for it. Game companies spend years on creating games, and a remake is no different. But the difference between a remake is having a game as its own body of work while respecting and maintaining the feel of the original. One series that's been doing this a lot lately is Capcom's Resident Evil franchise. We have seen the first 3 games in the series get a full remake with mostly good reviews, and there's no signs they are stopping. This could be to draw old and new fans in a single product, or to revamp the storyline for future projects. If Capcom were to continue creating remakes in the RE universe, then it would be expected for them to recreate Resident Evil 4. But what if I told you there was another RE game that deserves and needs a remake over Resident Evil 4? One that Capcom and the fans would benefit off of more. This remake could revamp into a terrifying new game for old and new fans. The entry I'm referring to is the 20-year-old Resident Evil Code Veronica, the 2000s entry in the series that was one of the last RE games of its kind. Now, if you played Code Veronica, you probably remember the crazy story that Claire and Chris Redfield go through during the game. One can even say this is where Resident Evil got its more action-based storytelling mixed with survival horror elements rather than its potential remake competitor, Resident Evil 4. However, Code Veronica has a large story, and it can take some time to complete. Capcom would have a lot of content to work with, but there is a lot of creative freedom to expand on the ideas and take them to new heights. On top of all of this, the visuals and dialogue in the game need a revamp. As far as characters, the cast in Code Veronica are perfect for a remake. Some characters are continuing their story, while others are just single entry characters. So in tonight's episode of Side Eye Gaming, I want to explain why I believe Resident Evil Code Veronica would be a much better remake than Resident Evil 4. Alright everyone, let's get into this. Code Veronica starts its dark tale 3 months after the bombing of Raccoon City, with the iconic Claire Redfield looking for her brother, Chris Redfield. Her research takes her to the Umbrella base in Paris. During her search, she is caught and begins to flee the base. With Claire's natural knack at surviving, she brings down almost all the guards at the base. However, after letting her guard down, Claire is caught by Rodrigo Juan Ravel. Forced to surrender, Claire is knocked out and taken to a far-off military base on Rockford Island. It's here where the actual gameplay begins. As Claire wakes up, she finds herself trapped in a cell only to be released by the injured Rodrigo. He explains to her the base has been attacked and there are barely any survivors. Claire is then released into the horrors of this attacked military base. During her escape, she meets another survivor named Steve. Yeah. However, Steve leaves fairly quickly and pops up in random points in the game. During these moments, we see a dark side of Steve, and it's about as much character development the game will give him. Both will work together to escape the island, but for the most part, Claire and Steve are left alone during their time on the base. During one of Claire's solo moments, she is attacked by Alfred Ashford, the dying heir to the Ashford family. The Ashford family is one of the main families that started the Umbrella Corporation. Alfred Ashford is very unhinged and blames Claire for the attack on the base. Claire, not knowing what's going on, rebuttals Alfred's claims, but to no avail. Alfred fully believes Claire to be a spy searching for the T Veronica virus. Later in the game, we find out that Alfred has a genius twin sister named Alexia. However, at this point, we don't know much about her. Let's just say, for spoiler-free purposes, the relationship as twins is hella fucked up. Later in the game, we meet Albert Wesker from Resident Evil 1, who turns out to be the cause of the attack on the Rockford Island base. Claire meets Wesker for the first time. However, she knows who he is. Her brother, Chris Redfield, was betrayed by him during the events of Resident Evil 1. After beating Claire to the ground and telling her how much he despises Chris, Wesker flees, showcasing his new superhuman abilities of his modified body. After solving many puzzles, Claire meets back up with Steve. Here, they are able to flee the military base via plane. It's here, though, we get our first boss fight with a tyrant. Claire defeats this tyrant, and their escape is in vain, though. Alfred Ashford immediately takes control of the plane they are in, eventually crashing them into an Antarctic lab. It's here Claire and Steve are separated during their search to escape this place. Here we find out more regarding the Ashford family, and bish, is it messed up. Once finding their way through multiple enemies, Claire and Steve are confronted by Alfred Ashford, but Steve shoots him down off of a ledge. Feeling safe and ready to leave, they use this drill to make their way out of the base and ride into the sunset. Until this happens.
Alexia! Alexia, you're finally awake. Alexia.
What is that?
Alexia Ashford, Alex's twin sister, is very much alive, but seeing her beloved brother die in front of her, she uses her new abilities with the T Veronica virus to attack the escaping vehicle Claire and Steve are in. In doing so, she catches our desperate characters, ending the first half of the game. It's here where we begin to play our original bioweapon slayer, Chris Redfield. Chris gets a message from Leon Kinney to save Claire from Rockford Island. However, by the time he arrives, the military base is swarming with enemies due to the release of the T-virus caused by the attacks. Claire is nowhere to be found. Chris searches for his sister and meets Wesker since the events of Resident Evil 1. During this time, both Chris and Wesker find out where their objectives are. In a mad rush, both Nemesises leave separately to go to the Antarctic base. Chris searches for his sister, while Wesker searches for Alexia to gain access to the T Veronica virus. Once landing, Chris must survive enemies and find Claire. After reuniting with her, Claire is ecstatic to see her brother. However, this is short-lived. Claire tells Chris she must find Steve. As she is explaining this though, Chris gets injured and Claire is left alone to find Steve. After solving a puzzle, Claire succeeds in finding him, but unfortunately, Alexia has infected Steve, causing him to rapidly mutate. Steve turns on Claire, chasing her down a large armored room. Steve inevitably catches up with Claire, but spares her. Alexia, observing this, kills Steve for his disobedience. In this moment, Steve converts back to normal and confesses his feelings for Claire, and his time ends with her. Claire returns to Chris to make their way out of the facility, but not before they fight the grotesque mutated Alexia. However, Chris has had experience doing this in the past and ends this bitch before the facility self-destructs. However, Wesker is waiting for Chris and Claire. It's in this moment that Chris fights an overpowered Wesker. However, Chris is no match for him in his current state. In this last attempt to escape, Chris drops a set of iron beams on Wesker, downing him momentarily, giving Chris and Claire enough time to escape. Finally, this game ends with a long overdue brother and sister reunion as they fly away into the sky. This is a very short summary of Code Veronica, and I made sure to leave out some really interesting parts of the game for those of you who may want to play it. This is one of my favorite titles in the series. Arguably, this is the last game in the series that has that classic Resident Evil survival horror feel of yesteryears. The backgrounds in Code Veronica were pushed to new heights using real-time 3D environments, unlike older entries where backgrounds were pre-rendered images. The camera work also made a considerable change by being more dynamic. The camera would follow, zoom, and pan alongside the character during motion. This was a big change from fixed camera angles, but the game still had a similar feel. Code Veronica is also considered one of the hardest Resident Evil games in the series, so if you're looking for a challenge, I recommend giving it a try. You'll love it. Code Veronica has a very unique cast of characters. Some are returning, while others are single entries. In my opinion, all these characters are great, but very dated. This isn't just dialogue or design, but more so the feel of how RE characters have been reimagined since Code Veronica's release in 2000. Since the last 3 remakes in the series, Capcom has stripped away some of the silliness of our main characters and replaced that aspect with more serious tones and attitudes. For example, let's take a look at Claire Redfield from her 1998 and 2019 version of Resident Evil 2. Claire in Resident Evil 2 Remake has had some major changes, both personality and visually. Some have not been the biggest fan of her changed look, but I loved it. Claire has been remade to be more believable. Now, I know this is a game about zombies and bioterrorism, but follow me for a second. In the remake, Claire's reactions are far more believable than the original 1998 version. Her emotions are able to be showcased more due to the abilities of technology. We can see Claire being frightened or sincere more easily in the remakes rather than in the 1998 version. However, Claire's overall badassery has been leveled up. If Claire is attacked, she'll stab an enemy or in some way fight back if grabbed. This game mechanic was not in the 1998 version, but having something like this now in the game adds to the character's personality in a very simple way. This, along with Claire's gritty training from Chris, gives her a reason to be like this and works well with her character. With the success of Resident Evil 2 Remake, I think Capcom would be silly to not bring back Claire, especially in a title where she has grown into her own. At this point in the timeline, Claire has survived the outbreak of the T-virus, and now knows what her brother Chris is dealing with in regards to bioterrorism. This emotion could be expanded much more than the original Code Veronica. Claire knows she needs to help her brother fight bioterrorism, yet also feels the need to be there to protect him. In any of Claire's entries in the Resident Evil universe, I think Claire shines more as an emotionally driven character rather than an action-oriented character like Jill Valentine. Claire is quick to help a person in need. With her now being thrown into the world of bioterrorism while still not finding her brother would be an interesting and deep part in Claire's life. Code Veronica takes place only 3 months after Resident Evil 2. Claire would have barely had any time to cope with what she's been through in Raccoon City, yet regardless, she still bravely fights on in the search for her only family left, her brother, Chris Redfield. I think showcasing this side of Claire more through storytelling will allow fans to fall more in love with Claire again in a very meaningful way. I love Claire, and honestly, she is my favorite character in the series, so perhaps one day we'll get another chance to see her in action. Now, in regards to Chris being remade, I think this would be a benefit for Capcom to iron out some of their mistakes they made with him in previous games. Chris's design and personality have shifted more than any other character in the series. This is very strange and honestly causes some confusion on why Chris is who he is. With the announcement of Resident Evil Village, we are seeing Capcom bring him back to a similar look to that of Resident Evil 5. This is nice, and I think Code Veronica could give us a chance to see a young version of Chris before his big beefy change. Also, regardless of what happens in Resident Evil Village, perhaps we can see Chris in a more naive, optimistic light before the heartache reaches him in later entries. With Chris's story, we can also see a psychological breakdown when he sees certain areas, such as the underground mansion in the Antarctic. This could send Chris into flashbacks to the events of Resident Evil 1, causing him to have some type of PTSD while searching for his captured sister. This similar storytelling was added in the beginning of Resident Evil 3 Remake with Jill Valentine, and I loved it. In fact, I wish they added more moments like this for returning characters. This adds a layer of reality that fits so well with the catastrophic environment. Imagine how shocked he would be going through another mansion with a lab only to find Wesker alive but mutated. That would be fucked up, regardless of what background you had. Just saying. Speaking of Wesker, This man needs to be brought back at least one more time. He's iconic to the series, and I would love to see an R-Engine model of him. His character really doesn't need much changing for the remake. It would just be really cool to see him use his new abilities in the R-Engine through cutscenes or gameplay actions. I think that final meeting with Chris in Code Veronica would be crazy, especially we get to fight him a little. In Code Veronica, we have single entry characters that make a big impact on the story and timeline of the series. These characters added to the horror of the game, but in years would really benefit off of a remake. First, let's talk about Claire's annoying partner in the game, Steve. Steve is a character that needs to hit the drawing board again. Everything about Steve could be done so much better, from the voice acting to his overall presence in the game. Steve sounds like Eric Cartman, and though it's kind of amazing in its own right, it still needs to be changed. His voice acting makes all of his stories seem kind of lame, even if he's trying to be serious. Yet Steve has an incredibly interesting position in the game. His father works for Umbrella, and in some way Steve has been used as a pawn against his father. This is similar to what happened to Lisa Trevor in Resident Evil HD Remake. When Steve's father goes against orders, he and his family become targets to human experimentation. Steve has had a very deep resentment to his father that wasn't capitalized well. If there were to be a remake, I think Steve should be a lot more distrusting and distant with Claire. We don't know what Steve has seen before meeting Claire and while they are separated. Steve, if given a good voice actor and a little more screen time, could really make the game have a darker tone. For new players who haven't seen him before, he could come off perhaps a little selfish or distrusting up until later parts in the game. This character development could give new players a connection to Steve that was missed in the original. Taking Steve to darker emotions for him to come around towards the end could give a reason for players to genuinely care about him. This is just a thought, but I think it would be really cool. Now, the characters I really want to see in a potential remake would be the Ashford twins, Albert and Alexia. These two are such off-the-wall characters that they almost seem mythical to the series. Spoiler alert. In case you are not aware, these twins are biological tests created with the DNA of their late ancestor, Veronica. We never see this Veronica besides through a small, rough-looking painting in the game, but it would be interesting to learn more about her as well. I don't want to give away too much about these twins, but they are so nuts in the game that I could see this perhaps being a challenge for the RE team to make. However, if done right, these characters could bring back a level of fear we haven't seen in games in a while. Imagine this scene being expanded on.
Okay.
I mean, that's fucked up now, and it's so subtle. These two characters also suffer awfully bad, yet still amazing voice acting. Seeing a deranged Albert Ashford talk about his sister and his family name could really make players feel uneasy with a good voice actor. As far as design choice, I think they are fine how they look. They already seem too far out there to be believable, and I think this could work well with the overall craziness of the environments the characters explore. There are certain scenes that would make your skin crawl, and I would love to see players go through it. Code Veronica has some incredible places a player must track through, and it's one of its strong suits in the game. There are a couple locations that would be amazing to see in the RE engine. Let's start with the Rockford Island base. A dismantled, crumbling military base with a T-virus outbreak connected to a mansion with a secret creepy room? Sign me up! The base itself is fairly large and has a lot of little details sprinkled around in the game. This base also has a lab area and an underground submarine to get to a different part of the island. Now, I could see the devs cutting out something like the submarine part, but in a perfect world, this would be really cool. However, I think my favorite area to be remade would be the private residence. This area is so cool and strange for the series. It's like if Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame were smashed together in one location. This area is where we see Albert Ashford's home, and it's so creepy. First, there is this giant doll hanging from the ceiling. This isn't something we normally see in a Resident Evil game, and its overall appearance adds to the otherworldly ambience that only Code Veronica has in the series. This resonance also reveals hidden rooms that just make you feel so nervous every time you enter a new room. If this were to be remade, I could see new and old players be really taken back by this area. Let's also not forget the Antarctic base area, which has its own messed up vibes. First, this base is completely run down, but has areas that are completely different room to room. Once you're in a lab area, the next a bunker, and then some mansion room areas resembling Resident Evil 1. This area represents the overall absurdity the Ashford family are capable of doing. We also have some really cool enemy moments here that help bring the story to a close. This area is very layered and again would look incredible if done right. Also, again, seeing Chris Redfield potentially have another moment in a mansion while looking for Claire, I think would really add to the terror that this area could have. Overall, I think the settings in this game could be the standout just like in the original. Only in a dream though. As of this recording, there has been no evidence to support a Code Veronica remake. There is really more evidence to support Capcom remaking Resident Evil 4, and that's another video for another day. However, seeing how Capcom is doing business lately, I would think they are trying to clean up the storyline for future entries. That doesn't mean they would leave out Code Veronica, but it's hard to say what their next move is. If we look back to Resident Evil Revelations series, Capcom still hasn't concluded what happened after Revelations 2. Rumors are spreading that Resident Evil Village was supposed to be Revelations 3, but only time will tell if that's true or not. How does this tie to Code Veronica, you may ask? Well, what I'm getting at is that Capcom will do whatever it is they want to do. Some are rightfully worried about them touching Code Veronica for a remake, and I get it. I mean, looking at how they cut content from Resident Evil 3 Remake did break my heart, even though I still enjoyed the game. Code Veronica is long for an RE game, and I wouldn't put it past Capcom to cut some of the story down. Also, Capcom has been changing events in games, and it could put Code Veronica in a different part of the timeline. Who knows? Again, this is all speculative, and we don't have any evidence to go off of one way or the other. Regardless, I think this would be a missed opportunity for Capcom to not remake this game. As of now, this game is 20 years old, and yet there are potentially remaking a game like Resident Evil 4 that has aged very well and is critically acclaimed. Code Veronica is a Resident Evil title that I feel gets missed out on when discussing the series, and that's a shame. Code Veronica is a game that represents what survival horror really was, and still is to this day. A lot of games could take some lessons from Code Veronica, and its daring attempt to reestablish what survival horror can be. Anyways, thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and also subscribe to Side Eye Gaming. Also, help support the channel by checking out my Patreon, and comment down below on what game you would like to see a remake of in any series. Silent Hill would be lit. Alright everyone, please stay safe out there, and until next time, I love you, mean it. Bye!